So in recognition of the Latin American community's tremendous contribution to Canadian society, the Parliament of Canada proclaimed October as Latin American Heritage Month in 2018. Hailing from 20 different Latin American countries, Canadians of Latin American origin enrich our national fabric with diverse and vibrant cultures, cuisine, music, dance, and so much more. At the library, we are so passionate about stories, from the books on our shelves to amplifying the voices of people in our communities. And it is our goal to bring stories to you that reflect and celebrate diversity. We are thrilled to have the opportunity tonight to celebrate and honor Latin American heritage through the stories of our three panelists. We have Christie Lazo, maybe just give a wave, Arvandi Komal, and Jasmine Meza joining us today to share their stories. And I won't do more of an introduction for them because my first question that I'll pose to our panel is to tell us a little bit more about yourself. And so we'll start with you, Christie.
Sure, thank you so much, Shannon. I'm really excited about this, and this is really special for me. I've been living in Orangeville. My family and I moved here in 1997, so shortly after we immigrated to Canada. At the time, I was 7 years old, and when we moved here, we were one of the few racialized families in the area. So for me, it was culture shock. I remember our first drive out to Orangeville and see, farm and cows, and I was like, where is my parent? Like, where are my parents taking us? And it was very small at the time. Like, literally, the Canadian Tire was, well, the LCBO is now on Broadway. My intro is I'm Christie Lazo, and I am by profession a digital marketing strategist. However, I do a lot of community organizing now, and that's part of the reason why this is so special, is because this is just a little sueñito, a little dream that I've had in my whole life of seeing diversity, seeing people that look like me in Orangeville, and really being able to celebrate that. And honor that, right? Honor everybody and feel like and make Orangeville a very inclusive place for everybody. So a little bit more about me. I work in the higher education industry, like I said, in digital marketing strategy, but I do the community organizing. In addition to that, I always say it's like the curse and the blessing of being the daughter of immigrants, especially the firstborn daughter of immigrants, where you're an ultimate high achiever and you do it all. So I'm also currently pursuing my master's, my MA degree at the University of Toronto in social justice education, because I do a lot of the work around not only equity, inclusion, and diversity, but also the aspects of decolonization, because that is something that affects all of us in different ways. In addition to that, I also manage the Diversity in Dufferin County Facebook page, which many people are very familiar with locally. And I'm also a founding member of the Dufferin County EDI Community Advisory Committee. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you, Christie. And we'll turn it over to you, Arvandi.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here and including me in this. My name is Arvandi Komal. I prefer to go through Nalisa. I am an Indo-Guyanese Canadian woman. By profession, I'm a project manager. Through my community, I'm part of the DEI committee, where I serve along with Christie Lazo. We've been living in Dufferin County for about 5 years now, going on 6. And yeah, so I'm an advocate for a better life, for diversity within Dufferin County specifically, where my son is growing up. So that is primarily why I am joining and doing as much as I can to, ensure that there is equality for everyone.
Thank you, and we'll turn it over to you, Jasmine.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be part of this community, and also to be able to talk a little bit of my background. I am from Honduras, Central America. I'm the first one immigrating from my family with my husband and my 2 kids. One right now has 14 years old and 10 years old. For profession, I'm a customer service. My degree is in marketing and business administration. I try to be active and try to participate with the community in this type of events, or even helping in any other little events where I get to know that I can be part of.
Thank you. And I think that's one of the, what we're already seeing the results of that EDI committee, and is bringing all of these people in our community together, right, to have these panels and to have these conversations and to showcase the diversity in Dufferin County. And it's amazing to be able to bring everyone together. And that really is what creates our community. And like you said, Arvandi, you want to create the community you want to live in. And so we're all contributing to that. And you guys are contributing to that by participating tonight. So thank you. You touched on this a little bit. But we'll just go back around the table to just talk a little bit about your or your ancestors' immigration story. And we'll start back with you, Christie.
Sure, of course. So I shared a little bit in the intro. We immigrated to Canada. I was born in Lima, Peru. That is where my family is from. And so we immigrated to Canada when I was 7 years old, like I mentioned. It was a very interesting immigration story because it's a little bit unexpected. My parents decided at the time in the early 90s, the political environment in Peru was not the most positive one. So it was, it was truly the story of you not do it for yourself, but you do it for your children. It's something that makes me very emotional especially because reflecting back on my parents' journey, and especially because my mom's not here anymore. She passed away in 2017. And it is, I'm sorry, y'all. I didn't expect to get like this.
Okay.
And just now the work that I'm doing within my life, now I have a daughter, a husband, and just I reflect back on the sacrifices that my parents had. And even though my mom especially never spoke about it, she never spoke the struggles, she never spoke about, how hard it was moving into this country, not knowing anybody, not speaking the language, not knowing anything. You literally start from zero. And so it was very complex, and it's difficult for me sometimes because I can't just ask my mom, like, hey mom, now that I'm doing this work within myself, within my family, I can't just say, hey mom, like, what was the story like, what was your experience like I don't have that opportunity anymore. So I often try to just reflect a lot and think back on those experiences. But yeah, so in regards to my ancestry, some of the work that I'm doing, and like I said, the decolonization piece stems from growing up in Peru. I had many privileges that I realize now, such as the livelihood that we had. One of the privileges is also the immigration story of my family. We were able to apply for, at the time it was called a landing immigrant, now it's called a permanent residency, and my family obtained that. And that is a privilege on its own because that is not the story of every immigrant to this country, right? So part of the decolonization piece and how that ties in is now I look back on the privileges of going, for example, in Peru, going to private school and being one, I say when I moved to Orangeville, I was one of the few brown kids in my class, in my school. However, that also was similar story when I went to private school in Peru, right? I remember being one of the brown kids because of because usually, that those privileges back home in Peru are tied to the color of your skin. And so it's a lot of work that I'm doing that my parents, for whatever reason, there was a lot of erasure in their upbringing as well, where they were not taught about what it meant to be Indigenous Peruvian. It was a big awakening. I remember the day I had a conversation with my dad that he had white passing privilege and what that meant for him. So all of those different layers have added to my immigration story. Growing up here in Canada now, doing this decolonizing work because I married also a Peruvian man, right? And so that means that our daughter, he has much more Indigenous roots than I do. So our daughter, I thought it was so important for her not to have those similar experiences as me of growing up one day and being like, I look different. I am different. Like, what does this mean for me, right? It was my family, the immigration story has a lot to do with assimilation into Canadian culture, right? I figure skated at Tony Rose. My brother played hockey in Orangeville, you know. We were the Tim Hortons drinking family, and you know, those things, and it was very tied to assimilation. But now I'm breaking that down, not only in my personal life, but also in the academic work that I'm doing, in the academic research that I'm doing, that focuses on decolonizing motherhood and breaking intergenerational sorts of pedagogies around that process. Because, and particularly also focusing on first generation immigrant parents, primarily mothers, because I think we go through a very, very unique journey. And so, yeah, it's been very, very complex, very multifaceted layers to my immigration story, my ancestry. You know, it was always, we're Spaniard, but it's like your ancestors are from Spain, but it's like, wait, I have brown skin, like this doesn't make sense. So now it's, you know, that decolonization piece, but there's a lot of added layers, and I think it also attributes to the significant diaspora that is within Latin America, because there are people from all over the world, you know, and that stems from colonization, essentially, right? So, which is a similar also story to here in Canada and Turtle Island.
Thank you, Christie. And I just want to say, I think your mom would be so proud of you for the work that you're doing and for having the courage to share your story, right? And it would just confirm to her that it was worth her taking that risk and having that bravery that was required for her and your dad to take the family and move them somewhere that they thought would give you all a better start at life. And you're continuing that work, right? And you're creating a better future for everyone as a result. So thank you. And Arvandi, I'll go to you. And did you say you prefer to go by Nelisa, was it?
Yeah, thank you. Christie, I really hope I can get through this. She got me all emotional. So I am a Indo-Guyanese. That is how I identify myself. So just a little bit more context on Guyana. So Guyana is not considered to be Latin. However, we are geographically located in South America. Culturally, we are Caribbean. And there are different, Guyana is a result of multiple centuries of colonization through different races. In the 1800s, just as a history lesson, guys, in the 1800s, the African slavery was abolished through British colonization. Then it got a little bit more, they got a little bit more creative, and they introduced indentured servitude, which basically meant that they were bringing South Indians, North Indians into Guyana to work to pay off debts that they had in India, my ancestors. These Indians were led to believe that they would be able to come do some work, get gold from the Demararas, and be able to go back to India and pay off their debt and get back their land and continue with their lives. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. You know, it was just another scapegoat for slavery, and we all know the terrible things that come with slavery. Later on in the 1800s, that was also abolished, and some Indians were able to go back to India, and a lot stayed. And they were spread out. They were spread out in Trinidad, Fiji, and in Guyana. So there's me. Guyana is made up of primarily Amerindians, which are our natives. We have 5 major tribes, and we have Indo-Guyanese, and then we have Afro-Guyanese, and then we have a very small mixture of races that are there. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Guyana. I was born there. I lived there for about 10 years. And my mom and with my younger brother, we migrated to the US, and we went to live in Long Island, New York. And for me was, I would say it was the first time I was led to understand that I was different, because in Guyana, everyone kind of, we do have our differences, but majority of the time we celebrate our cultures with the differences within each other. We didn't actually make a big deal that we were all different. If, you know, we will celebrate each other's religious holidays, we'll celebrate everything, you know. So when we lived in Long Island, and I went to a predominantly white school, I was literally the only child of color in that school besides my brother. And it was like the first time as an 11-year-old, I was like, I'm different. I'm not like everyone around me. And it wasn't like a different good. It was a different, I felt bad about myself, different. Around that time, it was 9/11, unfortunately, happened during that time. A lot of people, you know, misconstrued because I am Indo-Guyanese. They took every type of stereotype that there was out of me, and it led to a lot of bullying on my part. A lot of trauma that came from that, but my mom and my dad, they decided to separate, and my mom decided to come and live in Canada. And I think that was the first time when we left the US. And I remember talking to my geography teacher in the US. And I was like, hey, I'm going to live in Canada. And the first thing that came out of one of the kids, I was just like, are you going to live in an igloo? Like the way that they're pronouncing like Ontario, I can't even pronounce it because I've been so conditioned now how to pronounce Ontario properly. It was just like the misconceptions of what really everyone in, you know, south of the border was thinking about Canadians. So I was now like, oh my God, where's my mom taking me? Am I gonna be living like an Eskimo now? So then my mom, here she is as a single parent, 2 little kids. She comes to Toronto. She has her brother, my uncle, and my grandmother. You know, they helped us as much as they could. But my mom, you know, she's an independent woman. She worked 2 jobs, and she put herself through nursing school. And she had us. So, like, you know, Christie, you talk about those things.
It's okay. You know what? This kind of work gets you there. Like this kind of work, when you're doing this deep, deep work and like opening up these childhood wounds, like it's your inner child that has these sentiments and feelings.
Yeah, so I don't know if I could have ever done what she did. And I think, and I always tell her this, I always tell her, like, she's one of the strongest women I know. And she's given me a lot to look forward to and a lot to look up to. And it's a lot. And it always gets to me. Like, I'm not really an emotional person, but like my mom's my kryptonite. So it's basically like I would have never been able to do that. And the way she found that strength to do what she did, and the stories that she would tell us now that we're adults, like she would tell us certain sacrifices. And I recently watched something the other day where it was just this young lady she was talking about. She really didn't want her parents to make the sacrifices that they did, and wanted them to actually live their lives and, you know, pursue what they really wanted. And sometimes I really wish that for my mom sometimes. And, you know, my brother and I, we try our very best to make sure that she's taken care of. Like, she doesn't have to worry about anything. And, you know, she's always saying that she's proud of us. So I'm really happy about that piece. I'm really happy that we were able to make her proud. But yes, so now coming back to where we're actually talking about today. Sorry, y'all. So we came, it was, for me, again, I felt like I was different. I was just like, oh my God, where am I coming? I remember the first day in Rexdale going to Smithfield Elementary School, and I was bracing myself. I had created this really thick skin because I've gone through so much in my previous school. I thought I had to be very defensive. So when I went into my first school in Toronto and I looked around and I was just like, whoa, am I in the right place? Because here's another brown kid, here's another white kid. Like, you know, that's the thing. It's just like, whoa, this is what's going on. And it was like, I felt that I was in a bubble before and I didn't know all the different cultures that were out there. and all the different things that I can learn from different people as I grew up. And now, I am now in my 30s, and all of the things that I've learned from every single culture that I have, gotten the privilege to, experience. And that's the thing. It's kind of, I feel lucky. I feel very lucky that my mom was able to actually make that very brave move of coming to Canada and specifically bringing us to Toronto, thankfully. And I was able to actually learn that, I am not that different. And it's not a different bad, it's a different good. And we lived in Toronto, lived in Brampton. And then when my husband and I, he's actually listening, when my husband and I decided, you know what, we want to be brave and buy our first home. We were defeated, and we were like, you know what, we were going to the cottage one day and we stopped off at the Tim Hortons on Highway 10. And I looked around and I'm like, babe, this is beautiful. There's Island Lake right there. Like, why don't we just come live here? This is beautiful. And I was just kind of messing with him, and he's like, you know what? Let's do it. And funny enough, I ended up buying my first townhouse, and it's like a couple doors down from Christie. And and the world is so small. I kid you not. Christie's younger brother and I went to college together, and we were a group of 4. Mario being our 4th, and we stuck through our 4 years of college together. And then I was like looking up the ways when I was now fast forward to looking up I'm in Orangeville now, I want to get involved. I see this Christie Lazo, she's like part of everything. So then I message her, I'm like, are you the Christie Lazo? So yeah, this is how I have come to be, and being here today and just being a part of this. And that is my ancestral and coming to Dufferin story.
Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you.
And we'll turn it over to you, Jasmine.
Okay, I try not to get emotional. Let's see how it goes. Honestly, I think I already cried when I was thinking about what I'm gonna come and talk, because this is a topic that I try not to remember that often, because it's hard, right? So I come from Honduras, Central America. It's a very tiny country. And that's why I always say Central America. We're between Mexico and South America. I grew up in a town as small as Orangeville. Orangeville always reminds me that little town. And I was raised by my mom and my dad, which my mom is a color white, and my dad is dark. It's black from the community. So I was raised watching both colors. So I never learned about the difference of colors or different age. Honduras was discovered by Spain, but through the years there was a lot of immigration from everywhere in the world. So we have a big community of Italians. We have community from Turkey. We have a community from England. So we have a community an island that they speak English and French as well. And then we have also our Africans as well. So I, especially myself, because my mom and my dad were mixed, I grew up watching like normal. Like for me, there's no difference of colors, race, or if you're short, tall. I never knew about that, honestly, until I start traveling and I start, listening about difference. I never learned. Also, I have the privilege that my mom pay a bilingual school back home, which is very hard. Right now that I talk with my mom and I say, Mom, how you did it? Like, honestly, when I convert dollars to Honduras money, I say, Mom, how you did it? And she laughed, and she raised me, I always tell her, you raised me like a queen. I realized I was not a queen when I grew up. And I say, how you did it in a very poor country, you know? And she explained me, you know, all the sacrifice that she and my dad did to give us the best life that they could at that time. So I was in a bilingual school. I went to university as well. And in Honduras, not too many people immigrate back on the times, because honestly, and that's what I always talk with my friends. If you have food, if you have a safe place to sleep, you know, and a safe place to be with your friends, that's fine. That's okay. That's what you're happy. We're happy. We bring a cup of water outside to the street and we start the party. I was telling my son right now that he is trying to get into sports. I was telling my son that back home, because of the weather, you go out at 6 o'clock and people start playing soccer, basketball, and then old lady bring a coffee, and then the other one bring the tortillas, and the other one, and then the party start. And you go to bed at 10 o'clock, and then the next morning you wake up very happy because you had fun the night before. So it was not in my plans to immigrate. Immigration was not there, and not even being with a child on my arms. We see that very often back home. We see friends and family, you know, taking immigration. I'm sure you guys have heard the caravanas that come from Central America. A lot of people coming, and it's hard. It's hard to see that. And I always used to say, I don't know. I don't think I will be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So when the time came that, you know, I became a mom and my husband a dad, and we started looking how hard was things back home, how unsafe was. And I'm not talking, you know, about not having a car. No, I'm talking about that you can't go for a walk. You can't go to the park because you may be assaulted. So when we start seeing that stuff, we say, listen, we want our child to be raised how we were raised before, because there were times in Honduras where we used to play outside, right, in the street and be safe. And instead of getting into a car, you will prefer to go for a walk, go home walking. And when I was that time when I became mom, we were not able to do that because it was so unsafe. So we started looking to each other, and we said to my husband, listen, we need to find out what to do, right? And so we decided to immigrate. And I remember telling my husband, well, you know, your English is not good. You just know how to read English and you just know how to type English, but let's go to Spain, or let's go, you know, to somewhere where we can speak Spanish. And he started making a research, and he said, well, Jasmine, what we are looking is for safety. And the safe place in the world, it's Canada. That's one of the safe places in the world. So I said, well, oh, Canada. The only thing that I knew about Canada was my teachers and watching them in the snow. And everybody think about Canada back home like an igloo, as a lot of snow. So I was telling him, well, you know what? I know a little bit of English. I think I can make it. I don't know how you're going to do it. And he said, you know what? I'm going to make my effort. But we need safety. That's what we're looking for. So I didn't know my uncle was living here for 30 years already. My mom has a big, huge family. And I say to my mom, this is what we are thinking. And she said, well, you know what? My younger brother, it's in Canada. And I said, what? So I started getting in contact, which was very good because he didn't have anyone here. And so it was nice. He was very excited to welcome us. So Then we start, putting everything together, and I said to my mom, I need to leave. It was hard for my mom and my dad. My dad, I remember telling me, Jasmine, you're going to a place that you don't know anyone, and you may need to start from very bottom. And we did so much here so you can have a good education and all that. And I don't know how you're going to make it over there. And he said, I don't want you to raise your kids in buildings, because there they just have, when they say Toronto, they just see the big buildings. So they think there's no more life than that. And it's no. So I say, no, Dad, don't worry. He said, I want your kids to see the chickens and the cows, and, and live and have, the go to the park. And I say, yes. And that's why we're doing this sacrifice right now. And honestly, I was saying all that, but I didn't know what I was doing. It was just the pressure of everything what was happening, and just looking the way to protect our child, and to protect us, and just looking a safe place, right? So we decide, and we immigrate, and we take a plane, and I say to my mom, I don't know if I'm coming back. So my friends, my mom, my dad went, and we say goodbye. And it was hard because we didn't know if we will make it, if we will go back, not seeing our family. I remember the first years, we arrived to Toronto, which is a huge city in compare of our little town. And I remember one day opening I get to an apartment, 16th floor. I will never forget that. And I will open the door of the balcony and see this huge, beautiful city. And I say one day to my mom, she said, what's wrong? You've been crying. I say, yes, I don't know how to start. It's so big. It's a huge city. I don't know anyone. And I remember she's saying, you know what? You just have to do the same thing that you did here. It's just going to be in English. And you just have to keep smiling, and remember, always be with people. Her advice always been, it's not about money, it's not about color, it's not about height. It's about having good people around you. And making sure that you support also people. It's not about receiving, it's about giving, right? It was hard when she told me that, but I said, okay, I'm gonna start. So she said, go dress up and go to each business and knock the door and say, hey, I'm here. I can take a broom, I can use the computer, whatever, but I need to do something. Even though it was days, I remember that I was crying during the afternoon, and my child, while he was playing, he was cleaning my tears. And my husband arrived one day and he said, what's wrong? You've been crying. I said, I don't know. There's no reason to be crying. I have food, I have my child, I have my husband, but I'm just keep crying and crying every day. After I finish lunch, I start crying. So he did a research, and yeah, it was depression. He said, you know what, go to the doctor. I went to the doctor. Doctor said, well, this is normal. My child only had 18 months. First time mom, and then the shock of cultures, and leaving all your family, all that. And now that I think about it, I remember my son sometimes not eating, and I mentioned that to my mom. My mom said, yeah, you have to take him out. It was cold, and I was like, I prefer to stay indoor. And he was so used to be outdoor, because back home is 40 degrees, right, all the time. So they are outside, and we had a big community, and he knows a lot of friends. So he was always from one house to another, and then we changed in 5 hours to just being in a small apartment, and only 3 of us. So I remember that doctor saying, go to community center. You need to go and also go and find out, an early child center for your son. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that things happen, And I always talk about when I talk about my immigration story about depression, because that's a very real thing. That's mental health is it can go to anyone. Doesn't matter, your background, your social status, doesn't matter. Because I was a teacher when I was back home, kindergarten teacher. I know how to, baby steps, how to help a child. And I was not doing that with my son. It was like I was blind because
I think it goes to show that power of the community, right? And what you're describing is that you left your community and you didn't realize how much of a loss that was because you were so busy trying to do and trying to integrate and trying to be what you need to be here. And I think that's a theme between all of your stories too, and that strength in community, to carry us through, and then to make the communities that you move to feel a part of those communities, right? And I think that's part of the work that you're all doing.
That's right, yes. But here we are, we make it, and it was nice. I did find a different, not only Latinos, but different communities that did help, did give a good advice, and that's what I love from Canada. There's different food, different type of communities, and you learn every day, and reminds me that I always say this: we're not by ourselves. It's a huge world.
Thank you, Jasmine. So one of the common things, I'm hearing between all of your stories is the strength that I think passed down from your families, right? Your parents and possibly their parents. So if you can tell us now how you integrate your ethnicity and your culture into your daily life. So all those influences that you have from your past and how to bring those into your homes and into your community. So we'll go back to you, Christie.
Yeah, I'll get started. So like I said, in my last comments, it's a little bit complex for me because yes, I know what it is to be Peruvian. I know what it is to eat all the delicious Peruvian food that wins world gastronomy awards over and over again. And even, Spanish, speaking Spanish, that's my first language. When I moved to Canada, I had no idea how to speak English. I figured that out. I don't know how I did it, but at 7 years old, I figured it out. But, my dad really pushed us growing up to continue speaking Spanish. It was something that we fought against, my brother and I. When we learned how to speak English, we were speaking it all day at school and such. And we really fought it, but my dad persisted, and I'm really glad he did because, in higher education, when I was doing my undergrad at York, I'm a York University alumna. I also obtained, aside from my degrees, I obtained a certificate in Spanish because I wanted to make sure that I had that supporting piece when it came to my professional advancement and career. And I pursued it on a different level. And, now, like I said, my husband's Peruvian. So we often joke that because he grew up most of his life in Peru, when he met me, I spoke this very proper Spanish where he's speaks the slang and the street, and he's got a little bit more hood. And so now, so it's funny now, my Spanish is a hybrid of this Peruvian slang and what I call Latin American Netflix, basically. Because I watch so many shows, sometimes I just pick up words or pick up but yeah, so with that, with my daughter, that's the most significant piece of trying to preserve our culture is passing that down. And as I spoke earlier about the indigeneity piece, I'm learning so many things that I learned in the past about, for example, lighter skin or lighter hair or whatever it is, it's worth more or whatever in social value. I'm learning all of those pieces, even You know, my body changed after having a child. You know, I gained weight, and that fat phobia that I had to remove from myself, that is like an aspect of decolonization, right? And like raising my daughter in a different way. And that to me is like that not only indigeneity aspect of decolonizing a lot of the things that I was brought up with that are cultural. Because, you know, we all have that tia, which is an aunt, like that says, oh, estás gorda, like, oh, you're so fat, nice to see you. And you're just like, I love you too, nice to see you. You know, so those are like the cultural pieces I'm also unlearning while trying to like preserve the positive influences. But like I mentioned, growing up with my parents too was a lot about assimilation. What we're finding is with me being a millennial generation, we're really trying to reclaim our ethnicity, ancestry, etc., while the generation of my parents, which are like boomers, borderline, like I believe it's Gen X, with them, what is happening is there was a lot of assimilation. It was a lot about like being able to feel welcome, to be able to feel like it was safe for them to integrate into a new country, into a new space. So it was like, what do I need to do? I need to learn the language. I need to drink that Tim Hortons coffee. I need to enroll my kids in these like Canadian activities, things like that, right? So it's a lot of those pieces, but still, you know, preserving my culture through mainly the language, the food, and for me, it's that decolonization aspect and reclaiming of my Indigenous roots, and really doing my own research in that. Like I try to find out as much information. I have an uncle who actually is on the call, and I really appreciate it because he's always like finding photos and pulling up like different like things from like our ancestors, right? That I'm like, oh my God, look, like they are Indigenous, and it brings me so much joy because it's this piece of my identity that has always been missing and I've always been so hungry for. So yeah, it's a lot of not only just like preserving what I've been taught growing up, but it's a lot of like my own research. And one of my professors actually, who is incredible, she says it's a me search, because you're really reflecting within yourself. You're really digging within yourself to gain this knowledge and information, you know, to get to ideally where you want to be, which is for me is I would love to learn Quechua, which is one of the indigenous languages of Peru. You know, I try to like look up courses, look up words here and there, teach them to my daughter, just because it's those little aspects that make me more wholesome within my ethnicity and culture.
And I think our identities are so multifaceted, right? And they're never static. They are always changing. And the more we grow and the more we seek to grow and to learn about ourselves, and which means learning about our ancestry and, you know, our families and all of those stories, that all just helps define us and who we are and our sense of values. Like you said, you're even taking the values that you were brought up with or that might be associated with your culture and saying, does this fit me and my idea of me and my idea of as a mother? And do I want to take those on, right? And that self-reflection piece, I think, is so key for all of us as we're growing and learning about ourselves, and then that contributes to the community in the end. Okay, we'll go to you, Nelisa.
Oh, I think like we all have that auntie. Like well, like for like Guyanese, or especially like the Caribbean style, like the aunties, they will come and say, you get fat. Like that's the thing. It's just like like you welcome to my house, thank you for coming. Like, what is it like? Is that the first thing on your mind? But I think no matter which culture or where we talk about, there is that one auntie. And sometimes it's just like, it's the fighter in me that just wants to like, you know, that wants to talk back, but I could just hear my mom just ready to kind of like smack me in the back of the head saying, don't you dare. But, you know, just kind of like on the tone of identity, I feel that Guyanese people in general have a identity crisis. And just to kind of like peel away that is that as an Indo-Guyanese specifically, I am not Latin enough, I'm not Indian enough And there's a running joke in the Caribbean where the Caribbeans, they took us as a, like, you know, they felt pity on us. So they kind of like, you know, come on, you don't worry, you can come with us sort of thing. And that's like how we kind of fit into the Caribbean culture. So it's kind of like, it leaves us feeling like, so what are we? Like, where do we fit into this puzzle? And I think every Guyanese person feels that way. And they continue to kind of search through how do they adapt to that culture. For me, in terms of like how myself and my family and we preserve our culture, is just that we take what we've learned, and we, you know, we've continued to, like, you know, with the food, with the music, you know, even like with my grandmother, like there's certain things that she's continuing to, like, you know, teaching me, like, you know, certain things. Like I've had like a religious prayer over the weekend just to kind of bless my house. And you know, that's kind of where I was just like, you know, I need to, my mom was telling me, like, you need to remember these steps. We're not going to always be here to teach you, to kind of walk you through this. Like, you're going to have to teach this to your son. And I feel like my son was just a born Guyanese. Like, he came out like just ready for soca, ready for chutney music. You know, he's just like, you know, he's living his best Guyanese life. Anytime anyone, like, we've told him, like, you know, he's a 2.5-year-old. We're like, you know, you're Canadian, but mama and dad are like, you know, my husband's born in Canada. His parents are from Guyana, but I said, you know, and like, you know, ethnically you are Guyanese. But so now if anyone asks, like, hey, Kaden, where are you from? Guyana, that's what he says, right? So yeah, so it's just like, for me, like, you know, in terms of the identity thing, it's kind of like, we've always kind of like, I was just like trying to think through, I'm like, where do we fit in? And I remember it was like back in 2017, I was like traveling for work in India, and I had to do this this conference, and it was like a room full of 100 people. And I just gave my whole spiel and everything. And I just like, are there any questions? One guy in the back just raises his hand. I'm like, oh, what's your question? Screams loud in front of the entire, and everyone's there. And he's like, what are you? And I'm like, maybe I didn't hear that right. I'm like, what? And he's like, what are you? And and I'm like, can you elaborate on that? Because I'm like, I'm a little taken back by the question. He's like, you look like us. You don't sound like us. You have a name like us, but you don't act like us. What are you? And then it just kind of went really deep for me. It was just like, oh, wow. Here I was thinking like I'm Indo-Guyanese, but really I'm so far back from that. And the history of, you know, the indenture labitude and everything like that was kind of very far removed from any sort of history books and where it came from in India. They don't know anything about that. So it was kind of like, okay, so here is my history lesson, everyone. What am I? And if they were so interested and just so fascinated at the fact that, you know, they were, you know, people that, you know, are Indians that are in different countries other than India. And we were so spread out across the world, like in South Africa, Fiji, Trinidad, like Jamaica, everywhere there are different types of us, right? So it's like, for me, like what I'm continuing to do, just similar to Christie, is just like the me search, and that's a wonderful way of putting that. It's just I'm continuing to learn about my roots, like what I can do in terms of like making sure I preserve that culture and keep that so my son can pass that down. I never want that watered down version of us. I want it to be held strong and, you know, and healthy. So like, you know, I find myself wanting to learn to cook more cultural foods and like asking my mom, and just like that voice in the back of my head is just that they're not going to always be here. So I need to make sure I learn and I continue to, like, you know, take as many notes as I can to continue this onwards. But yes, that is about that's what I do. I see Althea has her hand raised. Are we taking questions?
Yeah, sure. Althea, you can unmute and ask your question.
It was more of a comment. So I really, you know, resonate with what Nelisa has to say, because I am Guyanese as well, and my family's completely mixed. Like I remember, and even you know, a lot of the individuals on this panel talked about it. I didn't actually realize, and quote unquote, I was different until I was in high school, because growing up, you know, sitting at the dinner table, my cousins are Chinese. I have Portuguese cousins. I have, you know, cousins from African descent, so Black cousins, and then there's you know, Indian. There's like all mixes, and to me, growing up, that was just normal because we were all mixed. And there's even like English white, if you quote unquote, right? So so to me, it was, I never really saw race. We were just all one culture, and like Nelisa said, you know, in Guyana, we were all come together, and even growing up, our families just all come together. There was no difference per se. So it's so interesting. And my mother actually speaks Spanish. She learned Spanish. I did not learn Spanish because I primarily grew up in Canada. So I am Canadian, and my kids are also mixed. Another set of mix, again, got put into our family. They're part Italian as well. So there's so many mixes in my family that it's, for me, it's just a normal. So, and I always laugh when people say, well, how do you identify? What do you identify as? I guess I identify with all. I don't even ever know how to answer that question properly. So yeah, so I resonate with each one of these individuals on here who talk about their family life and you know, what their parents went through and their mothers went through, and how their families are. So it is really nice to hear each one of your stories. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if that is if that's something that's happened because of assimilation, is that our need as a society to kind of box everything, right? And it's like, okay, what box do you fit in? Because then I can understand you. And I think we're starting to see that really change, especially the last few years, right? Pushing back on these labels and these boxes and these needs to identify in only one way, and to explore some of those multifaceted aspects of our identities. And like Althea said, it's just, if you don't know any different, then that's just the way it is for you, right? If you grew up mixed, you just celebrated that, and that's the way it was. All right, Jasmine, so we'll go back to you. What parts of your ethnicity and culture do you try to bring into your everyday? And I'm just looking at the time, and it is almost 8, but we're okay to go over a little bit. I do want to end with one more question after this one, and then I think we can open it up to see if there's any more questions.
Okay, I'm gonna be fast. In back home, soccer is everything. I think we know very little about other sports. So for me, it was always soccer. So I've been always watching soccer, and my kids now are into soccer. I did try to, put them in other sports just because back home we do a lot of activity because of the weather. Here we calm down a little bit during winter. I try to maintain the same speed. It's a little bit difficult, but that's what I try to do. For sure, I speak them in Spanish. At home, we try everything in Spanish, even shows in Spanish. So my kids have learned Spanish. The younger one is still learning, but the older one speaks very, very well. I have never sent them to school for Spanish. He has learned Spanish because my mom sent him texts. How are you? Where are you? Where is your mom? And now he reads Spanish. I was like, oh my God, you can read that. So he reads Spanish and he talks in Spanish. And one of the things that I am trying to pass from my background is that advice that my mom gave me, to please always support and be part of the community somehow. So I didn't know, but he was helping some new kids from school that they arrive and they didn't know English. So he was the translator. So I was like, oh my God, he's doing that. I didn't know until the teacher mentioned it to me, and thanks for that. I'm very proud that they are learning that, and that the language is helping others to be part of this community. I also, given that welcome, we Latinos like to hug. We Latinos always, our hands in someone, which we try to remind not too much, but it's something nice to have a hug. So I always say, if there is a chance and it's safe and it's okay, please do welcome everyone. In fact, in my house, my kids' friends, they always are welcome. I always try to have something, even if it's just a little bit, an ice cream or something. And I always say to my kids, listen, doesn't matter. Can this come? Can this? Sometimes I have to say, hey, wait. There's we need to go out, or there's something that we're planning as a family. But they know that everyone is welcome. And I in fact, sometimes I talk to them, to their friends, like they are my kids. And sometimes my son is like, Mom, he may think that you are upset. And I'm like, I'm not upset, but I have to tell you that was not okay. So I guess they feel welcome, and I hope so, because that's back home is like that. At least at my house, there's always someone, and we always have food for everyone. We say if 4 can eat, 5 can fit. So I try to pass that. Yes,
it takes a village to raise the kids.
My kids, I try to cook the food from back home, which is a lot of in carts, so I try to control that, but they love it. When my mom comes, also she spoil them with all our diversity. And when I go home to visit, I always try to take them. We have a Maya infrastructure, like about the Mayas. We have a city. So and we have also from Spain, we have some buildings as well, and we have a lot of history. So every time we go, I try to take them and have a trip where they can learn. And I do that here in Canada as well. So for me, always at least 1 or 2 times a year, our trip has to go to the museum and learn. If we've been in Ottawa, and I took them to the Parliament and try to explain them a little bit. I want them to know that the world is huge. It's not about only us, and to learn history, because that make a difference how you see life later on, right? So I'm trying to pass that. That's how I am trying to share what I am.
Well, I think that's something that we can all learn from you too, is that to always continue learning, right? And to teach our children that the world is so much bigger than their bubble, because at the end of the day, we all, like I was saying before, come from where we come from or know what we know. And if we don't consciously challenge ourselves or consciously go outside of that bubble to learn new things or to meet new people and connect with other cultures, and then we won't grow, right? So okay, so my last question that we'll just go through quickly together, because I think it's important, is what is one thing that you would want us to take away from this panel or from your stories that we could take home with us and take into our community work that we do as individuals? What is one thing that you would like us to take away from today?
I'll go
Christie?
first. Yeah, of course. I think the topic of a lot of the things I've said is that me search. It's really, don't hesitate to dig a little into yourself, where you come from, your ancestors. I mean, if most of us live here on Turtle Island, Canada, most of us are settlers, right? So where did we come from? Right? How did we come to be? Like, what are some things that, and this goes just beyond doing like a 23andMe type of test, it's tough internal work that you have to do. Speak with your family if you can. Try to just learn a little bit about, or even like, the everyday, like that breaking intergenerational cycles. Like, why do you do things the way you do them? Why do you do things this way? How is it affecting you? Should you be unlearning some of these things? Should you be approaching new ways, right? Especially with me, my academic research lies in the parenting space, right? So as a parent too, primarily, like what are some things that you should change moving forward because you know it affected you as a child, therefore you might want to do things differently with your kids, right? So it's complex work. I always say it's challenging work, but it's so incredibly important to really just dig into yourself and see where you really come from, you know, because it's important not only for ourselves but for future generations, passing that down. If you do have children, passing that down to your children, and really, you know, like with Nelisa and Kate, like really making them proud of where their parents come from. And Zoe would do the same thing. Like, I'm from Peru, that's where I'm from, you know, because she would visit yearly before the pandemic and she loved it. But it's passing those things down, because I think the biggest takeaway is like a lot of the work I do is that I, through my podcast, which is Be That with Christie, is the tagline is, you know, we could really influence the future by how we raise our children, right? So in regards to parenting, if we're raising them in a very inclusive, diverse, equitable, with those elements into their life, like, could you imagine what a beautiful future we'll have when kids are more welcoming because they have the knowledge, you know, to say, like, look at all of our stories, right? That's why it was like important to include, you know, I'm South American, you know, Nelisa is South American, but she has, you know, these other layers to her identity. Like she said, you know, like, yes, I was born in Latin America, but like, what, like, where do I fit in that context, right? And then, you know, Jasmine being from Central America, like, you have 3 different stories. Even though we're all Latin American, they're different, but they're also so connected. So it's like we're not that far away from other people's stories. So it's really like, you know, keeping our eyes open, doing that research, and yeah, and just influencing future generations, because we can make a beautiful world through that.
Thank you. And Nelisa.
So I'll give you the same advice and the things that I will always tell my son. It's never be ashamed of where you come from, and always be proud of your culture, who you are, and just shine bright. Never stop questioning things, and always push the envelope, because Christie speaks a lot about this. It's just breaking these generational curses and these traumas that has been instilled in us from like generation by generation. And there's certain things that we need to question, and there's certain things that we need to heal from. And that's one of the things that I I always tell my brother, and I always kind of fight over this. And I'm like, you know, we can't keep continuing to do things this way. And by me speaking up about it, it's ruffling a lot of feathers. Being the eldest daughter, the eldest granddaughter, you know, we're always the ones that are pushing the envelope. And, you know, don't back down from that, because the moment we settle, you know, we kind of go back full circle. So that would be my advice, is just be proud of who you are and just keep moving forward and, you know, continue that legacy that we have.
All right, thank you. And we'll turn it over to you, Jasmine.
Well, the same thing that I say to my kids, embrace who you are, where you're coming from, learn and be proud of. And at the same time, make your friends, your family, the people that is around you, proud of yourself. Never judge them how they look or how they are. In fact, actually, let's help them to embrace themselves. We are a multicultural community, and we have to respect each other, love each other, and just help each other and enjoy each other, if I can say that, because there is a lot, and it's good. Otherwise, life will be not fun, I guess. So I just that, and as a Latino, just keep the bright colors that we like, keep the happiness, and the parties, and always pass all the good things that our family have teach us.
Thank you, and thank you so much, ladies, for having the courage to share your stories this evening with all of us and to our wider community when we do share this onto our YouTube channel. I read a quote recently by Maya Angelou, one of my favorites, and she was referencing parenting, and she was saying that we all need to teach our children that in diversity there is beauty and there is strength. And I think the three of you really encompassed that and really showed us that this evening. So thank you so much.